According to Downing Street, Great Britain wanted to persuade the UN General Assembly on Wednesday to condemn Russia's action in Ukraine in the strongest possible way. Prime Minister Boris Johnson promised that he would do that in a telephone call to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Downing Street told us on Wednesday, "We want a clear message from the United Nations that the world abhors what it sees in Ukraine. The violence and baseless attack on a democratic country is totally unacceptable," a government spokesman said. Johnson himself said in Parliament that Great Britain would also do everything possible to enable Ukrainians to escape from the war. During the meeting with Zelensky, Johnson expressed his contempt for the attacks on Ukraine and stated that Great Britain would do everything possible to support the Ukrainian people and their resistance. Zelensky thanked British efforts to supply defensive weapons to Ukraine. They are crucial to hold back the Russian forces. Both politicians have expressed their view that further sanctions are needed to increase pressure on Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. And the UN, by the way, voted big time against this war, and only 5 were on the side of Putin. Experts fear an increase in terrorist attacks in Ukraine, especially in the area of cybercrime. A whole series of attacks on the computer systems of Ukraine and other countries have already been attributed to Russia, the think tank IEP, that's Institute for Economics and Peace, reported on Wednesday at the presentation of its Global Terrorism Index. It's possible that the threat of cyberterrorism is increasing globally in parallel with the escalation of the Ukraine conflict, they said. Targets could include healthcare, energy, transportation, and financial services. Even during the 2014 crisis, Ukraine recorded 69 terrorist attacks, not just cyber attacks. According to the report, the number of global terrorist attacks rose by 17% last year, but at the same time, there were fewer fatalities. Accordingly, the number of people who died in attacks fell by 1.2%. Since 2015, the number of fatalities have even fallen by a third. Despite an increase in attacks, the impact of terrorism continues to decline, says the report. According to experts, there are enormous differences between the continents. Most of the fatalities, with 48%, were in sub-Saharan Africa. The Sahel is the new epicenter of terrorism, writes the think tank. The Islamic State has replaced the Taliban as the deadliest terrorist group in the world in 2021, with around 15 fatalities per attack in Niger alone. The report highlights the changing dynamics of terrorism. It's increasingly concentrated in conflict zones and is underpinned by weak governments and political instability, said the think tank chief Steve Killier. A completely different picture emerges in the West. According to the study, terrorist attacks here fell by 68% within a year. The USA even recorded its lowest value since 2012. However, the decline in terrorism in the West coincided with the corona pandemic. Restrictions on travel and public gatherings, for example, could partly explain the decline. Once the emergency measures are lifted and society start living with COVID, there is a possibility of resurgence in terrorist activity, the think tank warns. The reason why many states are lifting anti-COVID-19 measures with persistently high SARS-CoV-2 infection numbers is due to the reduced burden on public health systems from the Omicron wave. This reasoning is now supported by figures from the UK. There, the Omicron variant registered a 67% lower mortality rate compared to Delta infections, an analysis by the British National Statistics Office showed. The UK Office for National Statistics is constantly examining data on SARS-CoV-2 infections and deaths from COVID-19. The current study was recently published with an analysis of around a third of all people who tested positive for SARS-CoV-2 in England in December 2021. 78.6% of the cases turned out to be Omicron-related. At that time, the Delta variant accounted for just over a quarter with 21.4%. In any case, Omicron was far less dangerous. The risk of death among those infected was 67% lower. The differences according to the age groups are interesting. Among the 18 to 59-year-olds, the mortality rate after an Omicron infection was even 87% lower than after an illness caused by the Delta variant of the virus. Among the 60 to 69-year-olds, this decline was minus 86%. The curve only flattened out among those over 70. Nevertheless, a 55% reduction in mortality was registered after Omicron infection there. When comparing Omicron and Delta variants in the UK, men appeared to be better off. Omicron mortality was 75% lower among them, compared to only 56% among women. The British statisticians compensated for a whole range of possible influencing factors in their calculations, such as social status, chronic illnesses, and other accompanying factors. So far, Britain has not imposed sanctions on the most prominent oligarch, but that could change. According to one MP, Roman Abramovich is trying to get rid of his villa and penthouse as soon as possible. That means Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich wants to sell his mansion and penthouse in London as soon as possible, which was reported by The Times, citing a British member of parliament. The newspaper quotes Chris Bryant as saying that the owner of the London football club Chelsea fears that sanctions will be imposed on him and his assets will be frozen. The government must act quickly to forestall Abramovich, the Labour MP said. Bryant's claim comes amid speculation that Abramovich is looking to sell his football club. The oligarch is trying to hand over management of Chelsea to the charity, but whether he succeeds is unclear due to legal hurdles. And there are other rumors about that as well. Abramovich owns a 15-room villa in London, which is estimated to be worth almost 180 million euros. He also owns a 3-story penthouse for which he is said to have paid the equivalent of around 26 million pounds. So far, Britain has only sanctioned 10 Russians with comparatively small assets in Britain. The British government continues to urge its allies to ban all Russian banks from the SWIFT communications network. We have a pretty clear stance that the SWIFT ban should affect all Russian banks, a government official said in London on Wednesday. The EU is still hesitating with this decision, but experience from the past few days has shown that the wind can change very quickly in these matters, they say. We want to make sure that we continue to set the tone in this debate, the government official continued. Unlike Great Britain and the USA, the EU excluded the two largest Russian banks, Sberbank and Gazprom Bank, from the SWIFT exclusion that came into force on Wednesday. The background is the high dependency of some EU countries on Russian oil and gas. Deliveries are mainly paid through these two banks. Britain, which gets only a small part of its energy from Russia, has long urged its European partners to reduce their dependence on Moscow. Unlike planned, employees in health and care professions in England do not have to be vaccinated against the coronavirus. On Tuesday evening, the British government thus confirmed a handout that had already been indicated. Nurses and NHS health workers were originally supposed to be fully vaccinated from April 1st to continue doing their job. Otherwise, they were threatened with dismissal. This has been the case for employees in nursing homes since last year. In the course of the extensive easing of corona measures in England, the British Minister of Health, Sajid Javid, recently announced that partial vaccination would be re-examined. The government has now confirmed that the project should be dropped. This is justified with the currently predominant Omicron variant, which produces less severe causes than the more dangerous Delta variant. The compulsory vaccination for the professional groups was enormously controversial in parts of the ruling Tory party. Towards the end of last year, Prime Minister Boris Johnson caught a massive rebellion from this group. There was also a lot of criticism from circles in the health service and the nursing professions, as it was feared that the shortage of staff could be exacerbated by the obligation. After the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich left the English football club Chelsea, a Swiss billionaire expressed an interest in the club. I received an offer with 3 other people to buy Chelsea from Abramovich, said Hans-Jörg Wyss to the Swiss newspaper Blick. The newspaper wrote that it is not yet certain whether he will buy it. I have to wait 4 to 5 days now. Abramovich is currently asking far too much, the newspaper quotes this. I can well imagine joining Chelsea with partners, he said, and I'm definitely not going to do something like this alone. If I buy Chelsea, then with a consortium consisting of 6 to 7 investors. Wiss is one of the richest men in the world. The US magazine Forbes currently estimates his net worth at $5.1 billion. He has lived in the USA for decades. There he managed a company for medical technology, which he sold in 2012 to the US company Johnson & Johnson for a profit of billions. It promotes and finances numerous educational institutions and environmental protection projects. Abramovich announced on Saturday that he wanted to hand over the administration of the English Champions League winners Chelsea to the administrators of the football club's charitable foundation. The oligarch had previously come under increasing criticism for his closeness to Russian President Vladimir Putin, the war criminal dictator that's acting now. Demands for sanctions against the Chelsea owner grew louder, and according to a Times report I mentioned earlier, there are already fears in London that Abramovich could already sell his possessions in Great Britain before sanctions can harm him. And as I said, Chris Bryan, for example, warned in Parliament this week that he's already trying to sell his properties. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.